Hello, all of our Slates and Koffee fans. We have a special podcast episode for you today. We have the incomparable Gharavi, who will be joining us to speak on activism in entertainment. For those of you who are not familiar with her work, she is an amazingly incredible producer, director, and writer based out of the UK, but she also does work here stateside in LA. But she is also a Sundance and BAFTA nominated director. And you may have seen some of her work. She directed the Cleopatra docu-series on Netflix. And we are so fortunate to have her here with us today to go through her process and her work that she's doing as an activist slash director, creator. And we just want to know exactly how she is able to turn her art into activism. And if some of you who are watching is interested in doing the same and using your talent to promote a cause or something that is very dear to your heart, she's definitely one to listen to and get insight from. And we're so fortunate to have her here with us today.
Hi there.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for joining with us today.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yes, unfortunately, my other co-hosts were unable to join us, but I am here and I am going to make sure that you are well received and
And
that you feel the Slates and Koffee love. So thank you so much.
it's amazing. I'm sure we're going to have a great chat.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. And I was, as I introduced you to our audience who may not be familiar with your work, I let them know that you are a Sundance and BAFTA nominated director, and we are definitely interested to hear about your activism and how you use your art to promote the causes that are near and dear to your heart. So, I just wanted to allow you the opportunity to speak on that, and then we can get a little more in depth.
Oh yeah. The I mean I love storytelling, and that's the origins of, all the work that I do is like about storytelling, which I think is a real political act, right? To tell your story, to exist through stories is so important. And obviously through teaching, I help elevate other people who need the tools to be able to tell their stories, because I think everyone really should exist in where we find where they tell their story. I don't know how else to say it, but that's what I'm really passionate about. And I think that's a lot about what you're doing with Slates and Koffee. And that's why it sounds incredible. And I'm glad to be finding out about it.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we started the podcast, because we wanted to allow other women, especially women of color in the film industry, to understand that there are real no limitations to how we can use this art form to impact other people and inspire ourselves within the industry, because you inspire me. I watched Cleopatra and I was amazed. I was like, I was so happy to see that perspective. And from it coming from a woman of color, it was even more impactful. It wasn't a cis white male portraying this woman. It was coming from the female gaze and showing her as an empowered, whole female.
I put my heart into it. I put my heart into trying to find a way of seeing her as a kind of woman that I needed to exist, which was not necessarily, I mean, obviously beautiful and sexual, but not sexualized.
Yes.
For having power without her needing to be powerful because of a man or because of a patriarchy that she had to co-opt, like how do we find a woman's power in her own, kind of just her own terms? And that was so interesting to do. And I feel like we really struggled to not fall into tropes that already exist. And, I think that Cleopatra was so co-opted by the male gaze already. And that's why a lot of that backlash happened, was just that people were upset that we were changing the narrative on it. And it was really unfortunate because, you don't have to love what we did, but, there's not a harm in having a different way of depicting her. And, I'm very sad that people in Egypt were offended by it. But ultimately, we don't know the story of Cleopatra. We don't know who her mother was. We don't know who her grandmother was. And if she had been of Egyptian descent, at that time, people would have been darker. And it's okay. That's fine. Like, what's the problem? Like,
right.
That's, we were all darker back then, thankfully. Like, where have we learned this hatred of darkness? Where's that come from? And that's a very recent thing that I think we need to work through and just kind of be like, this is ridiculous, and, I find like the reaction tells a story itself. And that is something that I'm thinking about, or just, like finding where that colorism is in our own society, and thinking like, well, we have some work to do. And I hope that some of the other stuff that I do maybe in the future will deal with that. But I think that we all have a role to play in how we diversify, how we see ourselves. Because I just think, I grew up in a time, I'm older than I look. I mean, I don't know if this podcast has the video, but I'm like 51. So I grew up in a time when, there was such a poverty of Black people on TV that I was so moved by the Cosby Show. Like, the Cosby Show being on television was like my nectar. It was so important to me to see that positive Black family, diverse family on TV. It just, it gave me so much, like positivity, because there just wasn't anything at that time.
Right.
Like nothing. I mean, there may have been things where Black peoples were shown as comical, but they weren't aspirational. And for me, The Cosby Show was the first aspirational TV show that showed me Black people, or, complex Black families that somehow meant a lot to me growing up. And, I knew that power of storytelling as a young person. And I think I was just like, these stories are inadequate. And I was just so hungry for more. There was never enough. Fame was another big one that I loved watching, like a show about a interracial, multicultural, school of performing arts. And there was great Black characters on there who, again, I related to as a young teenager growing up in New Jersey, saying, what do I have to look at that makes me feel like I'm not alone, I'm not crazy, and that it's going to be okay, right? And that's what I think storytelling is just a chance to create wish fulfillment and to create a space where our dreams can exist, like our fantasies of who we could be exist. If you want to be that superhero that saves the planet, then you write it, and we think that these mythologies don't mean anything. Of course, Batman is white, and he needs to be white for young white people to imagine that they can also don the cape and save, the city.
Right.
We need that for other people too, or for women, or for disabled people, or for queer youth. We need those superheroes to exist so that we can imagine ourselves in the world. It is deeply political. It is deeply political to have Cleopatra be a Black woman in a full sense of that. And I was glad to be part of bringing that to life. And you asked me what my passion is. And my passion is about expanding the idea of who we are through storytelling.
Do you consider yourself to be an activist in
Yeah,
addition
it's political. I think I'm a politician. I just couldn't do the politics part.
to
I always say it's like this is the politics I can do. And I'm very much aware that this plays to the strengths that I have. I just could never, like, if I went on TV, I would do something ridiculous, like throw a chair at them or something. So it's the moral equivalent of that.
Yeah.
And I love teaching. Teaching is a deeply political act because you're inspiring other people to be better than you and to take what you've learned, stand on your shoulders and go and do that next thing. And I've had amazing students who have gone on to do that. And I think, so it doesn't always have to be the stories I tell or my stories, but it can sometimes just be about saying, hey, what if you told us what it's like to grow up where you grew up and what your experience was, and how would it change the world if we understood your lived experience?
So Cleopatra pretty much put you in the spotlight, and it highlighted a lot of other projects. So how did that affect the way that you now tell stories or approach projects? Did it change you in any way?
I mean, I'm sure maybe it did. I wouldn't be so arrogant to think it didn't. I mean, I didn't like the fact that so many people were upset. I'm not someone who goes out to upset. But, I also read all the comments and I saw the place that it was coming from. I think there's a lot of misdirected anger. I understand it and I'm listening. I'm not like blasé about like what people said, and I'm not by any means calling everyone who wrote to me a racist. But I had literally people from white supremacists writing me and CCing in Donald Trump, like as if like what they were writing me was so important that Donald Trump needed to be able to read it. And then I had Egyptian people who are like, not very kind in their writing to me, obviously upset about their viewpoints, expressing themselves in ways that I think could have been better written. And some people I did engage in, semi-civil conversations with. I suppose, would I have shied away from it knowing what happened? No. I mean, that's totally on brand for me. I don't ever not want to be the fly in the ointment of how we see ourselves. I give myself the ability to be wrong and take risks. Taking risks sometimes mean you might get it wrong. I think overall, there were things I wish hadn't happened. One of them would be, I wish that the trailer that Netflix dropped did not come out 2 weeks before people could watch the show, because I think partly the frustration that people felt from the trailer, which I didn't cut together, by the way, was that they felt like it was quite incendiary, but they didn't have a chance to actually watch that. There were 5 historians, one of who was Egyptian, who really broke down, I think, very reasonably what her ethnic makeup might have been or what the issues around that were. And it would have been helpful if the show could have been something they watched straight away rather than those 2 weeks where I think the world blew up. I was somehow in papers in Peru. I've never thought I would be in a paper in Peru, but that happened. But would I change? I think all of this has just made me realize more and more how powerful stories can be and how important it is to have these global conversations about, what way we depict women and diverse women and how we change the discourse around equality, whatever form that is. And my gosh, my dream is only to have that conversation. If I'm making work that has no impact, I'm not interested. I'm not only saying I want to make work to irritate people, but sometimes the things that we do say have to make some people uncomfortable. And if it's the right kind of people being uncomfortable, great. I hope that we can evolve to having conversations without needing to necessarily tear each other apart.
Right.
And maybe some of the other stories I dream to tell are slightly less about, maybe it's just about women in science, for example, which is the next film I'm making, is a Virginia Woolf adaptation about a woman who in 1910 wants to be an astrophysicist. And she's deciding between romantic love, which she sees as a trap, and deciding between her ambition. So it's really great in my next film to be talking about the difficulties that all of us have, men and women, between deciding on career and committing ourselves to difficult jobs like being filmmakers or being astrophysicists, and deciding between having a family or having a relationship that becomes a thing that takes a lot of our attention and our, kind of brain real estate, right? So we can relate to this issue. And I love being able to talk about that, because even though that might seem very trifling, it's actually very deeply political too, because it's about how do women have success and families at the same time when child rearing on the whole seems to be a job that falls on women's, laps. And, how do you do that and also be successful at the career? I know there's so many women in my life who really, they work hard at making that work, and it's a big issue. I think we could, maybe Barbie 2 should be about this. Barbie should be about Barbie has some kids and still wants to be successful at her job, what is Barbie's job? I'm not quite sure. But, just being Barbie, I guess that was the whole point.
So what would you recommend someone who is interested in taking on more controversial topics? Or, I mean, you probably didn't even realize that Cleopatra would have been so controversial coming out the gate when you decided on doing the project. But
not true. I didn't think it wasn't controversial, because I wouldn't have taken the job on if it was just going to be like, let's make another white Cleopatra. Okay. So I knew that was already shifting things. But you're asking me like, what advice do I give? Is like, I think partly is not to put your sense of yourself in other people's hands. Like, I don't, people don't like me or what I'm doing. That's not really going to be internalized by me. I mean, I'm listening. Right. But my sense of value doesn't come from that. My sense of value comes from, or my value for myself comes from people who I respect their work. I really humbly have a lot of mentors, people who support, or even my students, and whether they think that the stories that they're getting and the value they get out of the teaching I do has any impact on their lives. And that really feeds my sense of self, right? So I think sometimes we care too much about what the wrong people think about us. And I think that's what happens in the social media age. Somehow the nameless, the person who doesn't even have any, posts, sends me messages that are just horrific. And I would love to find that person's mother and show them those messages and say, is this how you raised your son or your daughter, is to speak to complete strangers like this? I mean, that cloak of anonymity and that ability to be keyboard warriors seems so weird to me. I mean, none of us would talk to each other like that. I'm not sure where we got to the point that this seems to be the way we behave with one another. And I'm not condemning it, because I think there's a lot of good things about social media, and it's just a weird place we're at. So yeah, I think you have to just do the work despite how the reactions might come your way. And just, tell those stories that, I think I always say that unless things hurt or have some sort of reaction, I'm not sure you should be telling that story. It should be unsettling to tell a story. Like, somehow that's the fizz and the pop of it that tells you you're onto something. If it's too easy, it's maybe like it's a, just another version of something that already exists, which is okay too. Hollywood makes a lot of money that way. But I think if you're a political filmmaker, there should be something that is a bit scary about it.
Right.
Or, like you should feel something in your stomach when you're working on it. And that's, and authenticity oftentimes does feel embarrassing or scary.
Right.
Yeah.
So we just about have to wrap up, but I know it's such a lovely
I
conversation. I want to
know.
know so much more about you and your process
That
and
is so
the
kind.
projects that you're creating and the stories that you want to tell. Because like I said, you inspire me, your
Oh,
work inspires me, and I'm an artivist myself. And
yeah.
I believe that we have a message to tell and that it can inspire and impact so many people. And it's our obligation to make sure that these messages get out there. So,
Yeah.
how can our audience members find you, follow you, support your work? I
Oh my
want
God. Yeah, I want to hear from the good people out there
yeah,
who
good
like the
people.
work too, because the other, I've heard the other side of the
Yeah.
story. But yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram is where I'm most active. If you want to hear me spouting political stuff, talking about stories, just showing you my holiday snaps. But Logic of the Birds is my handle on there, or you just look up my name. And also just, drop me an email. I'm pretty accessible if you Google my name, either via the university email where I teach. And, like when you have something to tell me about it, or just drop in and say hello. I'm actually just working on a screenwriting workshop that I'm designing as well. So it might be a workshop that people can attend, or like looking at Mexico, like come to our storytelling retreat, myself and some other writers who might be doing some
Awesome.
teaching. But yeah, do keep in touch. And thank you so much for saying such nice things. It really means, see, this is where I get the reward, and this is what I'm listening to. I'm making a choice to listen to this positive feedback. And I'm so glad it's inspired you. It inspires me to hear that. Makes me want to be better at what I do, to inspire other women like yourself to tell their story. It is such a political act. And women out there, do not doubt that your story is important. To my diverse friends and colleagues, your story matters, and there are not enough of them. So never once think that you do not belong or it's not important, but learn how good stories work, and
Yeah.
do that,
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us. And I know that our audience is going to be blessed by the gems and the wisdom that you've imparted on us. And I, for one, will continue following you, and I will reach out offline to make sure that we stay connected. And for those of you watching, please follow, please support, because we need each other.
Yeah, we do. 100%. Thank
Well,
you so much.
thank you. Thank you so much. And you have a wonderful day.
You too. Take care,
Bye-bye.
sweetheart. Bye. Bye, everyone.